2, wars, rumors of war, famine, distress of nations. He cites that in this very article. And the reason that Jesus brought up all those signs was they said, tell us what the sign of your coming is going to be. He mentions all of that, says the end is not yet. But then he says, when you see these things come to pass, look up, your redemption's drawing near. Which I do believe was in an Israelitish context where he was saying to his Israelitish believers, when you see all this, look up because your redemption, the redemption of Israel, promised all the way through the Old Testament, is coming when Christ returns, gathers all 12 tribes, sets up the kingdom, the redemption of Israel. Makes all the sense in the world. The church has, of course, Christianized that into us looking up, anticipating the rapture, and when we see all these signs, look up, your redemption draws near. But there was, again, let's follow the rules, no church at the time, no rapture teaching at the time. Paul's books didn't exist yet. The only thing Jesus could have meant was the redemption of Israel promised by all the prophets. Secondly, he said that our task is the proclamation of the, quote, gospel of the kingdom. That phrase only shows up 3 times in the New Testament. And what kingdom would Jesus have been talking about before his death, burial, and resurrection? What gospel would he be preaching? It wasn't the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Not that gospel.
Well, on top of that, John said they didn't understand all that anyhow.
They didn't understand all that. So what was it they were going out there preaching before the death, burial, and resurrection? The gospel of the kingdom. The king is here. He's the king. The Messiah is here. That means the promise of the kingdom is secure. The kingdom is coming, which is why the last question they would ask him at the beginning of the book of Acts before he leaves the planet is, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? The kingdom concept never left their thinking. And he didn't change it or correct it. It stayed consistent all the way through his ministry and all the way out into all the New Testament writing. Kingdom means exactly what Jesus' first century Jewish Israelitish audience believed it meant based on all the scripture they had extant at that time, which was a physical earthly kingdom on David's throne when Messiah returned. It's the only kingdom he could have been talking about, but you know that's not what Kim Riddlebarger meant. He says the church needs to be about the task assigned to us in the last days, the proclamation of the gospel of the kingdom. And you know what he means is the kingdom that is now existing in the 1,000 years we're now living in, the millennial reign of Christ on David's throne in heaven somehow, somewhere, though David never ruled from heaven, somehow the throne in heaven is now David's throne, inexplicably, and Christ is now ruling and reigning. We're living in the realized kingdom at this very moment. It's just another example of how easily someone can misuse biblical language and make it sound good, but pulled from its context, it had a different meaning when Jesus used it than the meaning that Riddlebarger has imposed on it 2,000 years later. I think that confuses the issue. If you're going to use Bible language, which I do think we should do, if you're going to talk about Bible things, use Bible words, but use them with the same meaning that they have in the Bible, right? You don't talk about a halfway kingdom in a slightly improved state of affairs. You know? It's not the way it's described in the Bible. Second, the return of Christ clearly marks an end to the temporal nature of life as we know it, called this present evil age. At his return, Jesus will raise the believing dead, judge all men, and send the wicked to the fires of hell. The elements of this earth burn up, and the new heavens and the new earth will be established. This scenario completely destroys much of the contemporary evangelical prophetic speculation, which advocates a, quote, secret coming of Christ and a, quote, rapture of believers, and what text can be adduced to argue that Jesus comes back secretly? We just sort of read 1 Thessalonians 4, where Paul's speaking of us and them. They, sudden destruction. Us, rise to meet the Lord in the air. Is there any problem? We have indications all the way through the Bible of God speaking to particular people. Secretly.
Paul on the road of Damascus.
Paul is on the road of Damascus with other people.
Secret conversation.
Yes, a secret conversation with Paul where he falls down and he speaks, but the people with him didn't see anybody. And where was the place where a voice came down from heaven, spoke to Jesus, and some said it thundered? Secret conversations. The Old Testament prophets, when God spoke to Elijah, did he have to tell everybody what he said to Elijah? Or was he able to just speak to Elijah? I mean, you have so many examples in the Bible. Jesus, after his resurrection, shows up in a room behind locked doors where his apostles are gathered. He had done it a week before, and a week later he shows up again to a group of people. Did anybody else in Jerusalem seem to be aware that he was there? No. Secret? Seems to be a secret. He was walking with the two disciples along the Emmaus Road. Did he even tell them who he was? It was a secret.
Was it a garden?
Yeah. And so I have no problem at all with the notion. And Riddlebarger is Calvinistic in his soteriology. And so he shouldn't have any problem with the notion that God can treat his elect differently than he treats the non-elect. And if 1 Thessalonians 4 means what it says, 4 and 5, then there is in fact a separation between those that are not ordained to wrath and are therefore taken up off the earth before the wrath begins, and those that are saying peace and safety, and sudden destruction falls on them. Who was it kept secret from? Clearly the ones who the judgment fell on. So let's go back, and his question is, and what text can be adduced to argue that Jesus comes back secretly? Plenty of them, all the ones we just went through. So without that parenthetical statement, what he wrote was, this scenario completely destroys much of the contemporary evangelical prophetic speculation which advocates a secret coming of Christ and the rapture of believers a full 7 years before the final judgment at Christ's bodily return. Does Jesus come back once or twice, with one of them being secret? This is such a silly argument. Does Jesus come back once or twice? This is very common among amillennial writers, and that's why I want to touch on it. One of the arguments that they make is, well, how many second comings are there? If he comes back to get his church in a rapture, that's the second coming. So then when he returns 7 years later, is that the third coming? Is there another one at the end of the 1,000 years? Is that a fourth coming? How many second comings are there? Let's talk about his first coming for a moment. When he died, Mary comes into the tomb. She thinks he's the gardener and asks him where they've taken the body of my Lord. He says, Mary, to her. She recognizes who he is, and he says, don't touch me. I haven't yet returned to my Father. Right? Within a matter of days, he shows up to Thomas and says, put your fingers in the holes in my side. Touch my hands, touch the holes. See that I am a man, real man, flesh and bones. Touch me. Where's he been?
To the Father.
He's been to the Father. He has to have been, right? Sure. Then, as I mentioned, he appears on the Emmaus Road. He then appears by the seashore, by the Sea of Galilee, when they're all out there fishing. And he says, children, have you any meat? No, we've caught nothing. Cast out on the other side and you'll catch. You can't. And Peter says, it is the Lord. Jumps into the water, swims to the shore. Jesus is sitting there cooking fish, which is really funny considering he just asked them if they had caught anything. Of course, he says before Pentecost to his disciples, stay here at Jerusalem. You'll be endued with power from on high. And then he goes up into the clouds. We know he's already done that once, at least, right? Because he went up to the Father and then came back. Now he's gone up a second time. And then he talks to Paul while Paul's on the road to Damascus. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Then Saul writes to the Corinthians and says, as proof of his own apostleship, have I not seen the Lord? And then in defending the resurrection says, he was seen by the 12, he was seen by James and Cephas, he was seen by over 500 brethren, the most of whom are alive today, but some have fallen asleep, and he was seen last of all as one born out of due time by me. I saw him, I saw the Lord resurrected, the resurrected Lord, I saw him. And this is after he sailed off before Pentecost. So how many first comings is that now? Okay, and then John is on the Isle of Patmos a good 30 years after Paul's dead. And who shows up? Jesus shows up. So really, how many first comings are there? Well, what we have to recognize is that all of those events all constitute the first coming of Jesus. But in the Bible, it does talk about his second coming. Well, there's no problem with his second coming being several different events and several different appearances to different people over different times. There's no problem with that because it's exactly what the first coming was like. So the whole insidiously stupid argument, how many second comings are there? And you have to say it that way. You have to use that tone of voice when you say it. Because it's just a dumb argument. It fails to recognize the facts concerning his first coming. And even though he had appeared several different times to several different people after his death, burial, and resurrection, those weren't counted as his second coming.